This is the Perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah!
Not only do I not have time to delegate, but Micah, no one can do this as good as I can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your co-host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me, as usual, the man, the myth, the legend, Micah Shalansky. Micah, how are you today?
Jarvis, I'm doing fantastic. Super excited to be back on the pod, chatting with you about very fun stuff.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about delegation. It's interesting. I think delegation runs a spectrum from like a trigger word to a superpower, right? Some of us like delegate, kind of to your opening quote, I don't have time to delegate. I can't delegate. Nobody can. What I do is so technical, nobody can take this over. To people at the opposite extreme that are, and we joked about this beforehand, delegating everything, including the purchasing of toothpaste at their house, not to name any names. And so we have the whole spectrum of delegation from, again, like I said, a kind of a trigger word to a superpower.
Yeah, and I really think that there's so much head trash around this, right? That so many people think that if you start delegating certain items, that all of a sudden you're saying these items are beneath you and that these items aren't, worth your time anymore. Therefore, you're better than somebody else or whatnot. And you have a lot of this head trash and really got to push back it. And Jarvis, I know you like to say this a lot, so I'll steal your thunder on it, is, you know what? You already delegate 99.9% of everything else in your life. And when you say, no, I'm not, did you make your clothes? Did you make the device you're listening to this on?
Yes, yeah.
Right? Did you make your computer? What about your car? What about your gas? What about all of these other things that are out there? Right? So we already delegate 99.9% of things already in our life. Now what we're talking about with delegation is how do you up the value you provide to your clients by delegating, right? So we're not saying tasks are beneath us. We're saying, no, we want to strive to this next level of value. And the way we get there is the correct team members.
Yeah, and I think there's this misnomer, Micah, that delegation is for the lazy, even though to your point, you're already delegating virtually everything in your life. But delegation is actually an incredibly hard task and something that you and I see again and again. And we've had the opportunity now to work with thousands of advisors. The most successful advisors do the hardest things, like raising fees, like graduating clients, like delivering massive value, like delegating. So you can get your practice to a certain level just by pure muscle. Right? Working long hours, hard hours, just pure muscle. You will not get to that next level without doing these hard things like delegation.
Yeah, just plain and simple, you won't, right? Because there's a limited time in the day. And then it gets to this aspect that you only have your peak efficiency. And then at some point, your efficiency is going to start to deteriorate. So one of the concepts that I like to embrace with delegation, Jarvis, and I know you're on the same page of this, is saying, you know what, there's tasks that I just thoroughly enjoy to do and they add value, right? And those are the ones, that's the space that I want to live in. I get a lot of joy from it. I'm really good at this task and it provides a lot of value. Those are things that I really want to keep inside of my wheelhouse. But the things that I'm doing that I either maybe enjoy doing, but I'm not really good at and don't deliver value, even though I enjoy them, those are the hard ones for me that I got to take a pause at and say, you know what, I need to bring somebody else in to do this. The other aspect that I have a hard time on delegating is anytime something is that I've done for a while that's client facing, or very compliance oriented in one of those two natures. And now I got to bring a team member into it. I'm dubbing them with a lot of responsibility that in the end of the day, I am liable for, I'm responsible for, and I'm going to bring them along this, that trust I'm in placing them. I got a hard time with that.
Yeah, actually, funny story. An advisor I know, let's call him Micah Shalansky, early on.
Just for random names.
Could be anybody. I know a lot of Micah Shalanskys. I know one. I'm looking for a second one. I remember early on when we first started doing masterminds, it came out one day that you were still doing your own billing. Now,
that's correct.
Now, when this comes out in discussion, I'm like, what? There's something that I've delegated that Micah has, and I danced and I did this little jig and this whole thing. But you very validly brought up a point. Hey, this is a mission critical task. There are literally advisors sitting in jail right now for messing up their billing. Now we can argue how they mess it up, but there are literally advisors in jail right now for messing up their billing. And so that was a very difficult task to delegate. And I think sometimes that was good for you to delegate. It's good for all of us to delegate, but sometimes we get caught and think, I'm going to delegate the very hardest task to delegate versus the easiest one.
Now, one of the things to think about with this is just because we delegate something doesn't mean we don't review it. So there's a difference in delegate and forget tasks and reviewing things, right? I am sure there's things that I've already delegated that I don't even know that I've delegated, because I've delegated them so long ago, they're just on autopilot and these things just automatically happen, right? But then there's also things that are mission critical tasks that we've delegated out to our team that we still review. Let's just take the billing example, right? Our team, we have 2 ladies that work together and do all of the billing, which is fantastic. And then they send me a file to review, and we have a time that we go through it together. We have some, formulas and automation to check for things. We spot check other things, right? So we have a nice little process that we're going to go through on reviewing our billing, but I'm still reviewing it, but I'm not doing it. And some of the head trash, Jarvis, that I had for a long time was, well, if I'm going to spend the time to review it, why don't I just do it? Because then I know it's done right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to kind of some, I don't call it lack of integrity with yourself, but sort of a lack of awareness of how long things are taking. So there's a lot of things where I think, oh yeah, that just takes a minute. But if I set a stopwatch on it, right, it's not just a minute. It's now taking me dozens of minutes. It's hours. I'm bouncing back before. And especially I think when we're not honest with ourselves on how long something takes, we allow it to get interrupted. I just need to do billing real quick. No, go ahead and interrupt me. It's not a big deal. And then this mission critical task that you're so worried about, you're multitasking in between it, you're increasing your risk of messing it up.
And that's why we're so irritated when friggin' notifications go off.
Yes.
And in fact, Jarvis, I won't call him out on the podcast, but he'll know himself when he's listened to it. I was on a meeting with him and his head operations person recently, and we did a Zoom meeting. We're going through, they're doing some awesome things and had some questions. So we were doing a little bit of coaching on that. And they did a share screen with me, a screen share with me, which is great. So I was going through and looking at a couple of their stuff, and the head of their whole operations department had constant notifications going off on every single email. No. And so their emails were just sitting there popping up like the entire time. And I was just like trying to hold back, right? And not just like explode on this. But this, from one aspect, it's so rude. For one, you're sharing your screen and it's a bunch of other random stuff that's coming in. So you're not paying attention to the meeting, right? You are not being hyper productive with your time because you're constantly having notifications go off. And by the way, if you think that this isn't a thing, we have a great test that we can run by you and prove that this actually is a thing and how much it distracts you. So this is a big reason that we're so adamant that notifications should be turned off. And this is the reason that we talk about delegation and not doing 17 tasks at once. About you need to focus your time on what is the most valuable use of your time. We can have a separate discussion on what that is, but whatever that is, that's where your time needs to be focused at. And then when it's time to move on to something else, you move wholeheartedly into that next task.
Micah, since we're on the subject of interruptions, notifications, emails, that is a great task to delegate, So we always talk about, right, automate, eliminate, eliminate, automate, delegate is kind of when we're looking at any task. Email is a great place to start. Not only, so an automate step would be get Sanebox set up, does some great email filtering, but that delegate part is, hey, somebody really needs to be in there and just deleting all the crap email that you get, right? Of all the emails you get during the day, no matter how good your spam filter is, what are 90% of them are pure garbage, 95%? Just delegating the task of, hey, delete any email that doesn't seem relevant. And if you're concerned at all that it might be relevant, now here's where the system comes in. Drag it into a mat to review folder. So you can have an action mat folder, a mat to review folder, and then just archive everything else. Now don't delete it, move it into an archive folder so you could always find it if the wrong thing gets deleted. But that's something, Micah, to your point, that it sucks up an enormous amount of time in a person's life that needs to be delegated.
So one way you would do this in Outlook or Gmail, just as a thought, let's say you're still checking your own email, but you want someone to be able to do this for you. Here's what I would do. Your inbox, set up a rule that would skip your inbox on all emails coming in, except for if they come from a handful of people, right? So if Jarvis is going to email me, it's going to come to my inbox. Everything else, everything gets skipped and goes into a team review folder. And so all 100% of emails go in that team review folder. Then whoever on your team, right, Carrie is my lady, she has to go through now and she reviews all of these emails, and then she only highlights ones that I need to respond to, then that goes back into my inbox or the Micah review folder. Now, the reason I like it to skip your inbox is if you still have an email habit, you're going to go click on your inbox, right? And I don't want to say, oh, the team hasn't been here or whatnot. Then you're going to start doing, you're going to start filtering those emails. You're going to start working on them, etc. When that's not your focus. Your focus should be all of that needs to go to the team. You only see what has been filtered. Then you work on the filtered items.
Same applies for incoming phone calls, right? No advisor should be answering their own phone. Really, I think under any circumstances, should you be answering your own phone? One, it creates this terrible precedent with clients. It's very non-productive for you. You're getting interrupted. But again, that's something that can be easily delegated. Go ahead, Micah.
Oh, I want to push back on you on that one. Is that all right?
Please. Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh.
So let's say that you're walking down your office, right? You just, a client just left, and you're walking back and you hear the phone ring once, twice, 3 times, and it's not being answered. You said under no circumstances should an advisor answer the phone. So do you just let that phone keep ringing, even though it could be a client, or do you step up and answer the phone because your team's not answering it?
Ooh, that's a fun scenario. I haven't answered a phone in years. So my answer is no. I would definitely be standing there looking at everyone. And then we would have a discussion about it. Like, hey, I was in the office and I heard the phone ring 5 times. And you know what Colleen would normally say? She would say, yeah, I saw it was a wholesaler. I didn't want to bother with a call. Okay. How about you, Micah? Would you pick up that phone?
Oh, absolutely. You better answer that phone by the 2nd or 3rd ring. And if I go to answer a phone, you can, because you can see if it's ringing a couple of times. And if I walk towards the phone, the team just like jumps on it and they would have a conversation, right? Because by the 3rd ring, because we have filters set up in Ring Central to kind of block wholesalers and whatnot, but I don't really care. The phone should not be ringing consistently because it distracts, because then it rolls back to the other team members as well. And so, because we have a larger team. And so, no, the front desk person needs to answer the phone. And if they're unavailable, then the backup person needs to answer that phone by that 2nd ring. And that's just it. That's just the rule in the office. So, but yes, I agree with you. That shouldn't be a habit where it says, oh, I'll take the 2 o'clock shift by answering the phones. Absolutely not. Is you need to have your team do it. And if there's any reason that comes up that you're thinking about answering the phone, you need to stop right there and have a team-wide discussion. What went wrong that's getting you on the phone?
Well, that's a great example, right? Just because, we talk about, hey, when you delegate it, you shouldn't touch it again. And ideally that's the case, but there does still need to be safety mechanisms in there. Yeah. For example, I know you're the same way. I try not to do anything in my calendar, but if I glance at my calendar and I notice that something's missing, like a travel thing, now I'm getting all the way into it, because if one thing's missing, 5 things are missing, but I'm getting into it by bringing that person on board. So Zach, my EA, when I noticed there was some travel missing, I say, all right, Zach, let's get on the phone, man. Where's my travel? Oh, I put it here, but it's not here. Listen, this is the place I look. And it's not an angry discussion. It's just like, this is our system. I need to be able to see all of my travel at this location, and then it needs to link to my TripIt so I can see all of the details there. And if that's not there for some reason, then we need to have a discussion. So yes, I'm delegating this. Yes, I'm not going to take over travel myself, but I am going to have safety mechanisms in place, like your phone ringing example.
So both Jarvis and I got new executive assistants. So Tori's moving on, which is great things. Well, she's staying with us, but she's doing more relationship management.
I was going to say, if Tori's available,
that's a great news. We now have an opening for her.
That's right.
So I have a new executive assistant that's helping me out, but it's one of those same things is that I expect, and maybe this is a wrong expectation, but I know things are going to be different because Tori's been handling things for so long for me. There's a lot of stuff that she does that's just not documented. It's just not. So now is the great opportunity when Carrie comes in and says, okay, great. I want you to pull the process on this and review it and follow the process. Now, if we don't have one, I want you to write up what it should be based on it. Then we're going to review it. So when something goes wrong on the calendar, when something goes wrong in a communication standpoint, right? I'm not going to get super upset about it. So great. Pull the policy and what happened? Did you follow the policy? Well, Micah, we don't have a policy on that. Okay, great news. Now we're going to create one, right? And what should that be? Because again, I got years working with somebody else. Now we have a new team member. Clearly things are going to be missed a little bit. And that's the other reason you got to have, whenever you delegate, you got to have a running agenda of the items that you've delegated. So in Carrie, and again, I think she's doing a good job. Her previous job when she was an EA, her executive didn't want to know about anything that she'd already done. Right? If she delegated and Carrie took care of it, it was off the list. He didn't want to hear about it again. I'm like, fascinating. That's not me. Right? If I delegate something, I want to see the list of things that you completed because we're new in this relationship. So we have a whole list of things so I can see what she's actually been able to complete. And then what are the things that have been kicked off and kind of how she's gotten to these answers. So you got to figure out what works for you. But Jarvis, I love that running agenda for our weekly EA meetings so I can see what they're working on and I can get a glimpse. That's what I tell them as well. I want a glimpse into how you're approaching this problem. And if you've just made a decision and said, hey, I'm going to go this way, well, great. I want to know why, right? This is the showing your work aspect of it. I want to know what your thought process was that led you to that, because maybe you got the right answer, but we use the wrong thought process. Then next time it'll be a problem, right? So those are things that I'm looking for when I'm delegating.
Something that really helps when you're designing this process, and here's where I see a lot of advisors get stuck, Mike. I know you and I have gotten stuck here before. We think, all right, what I need to do is I have to have a detailed 27-page checklist to cover every possible scenario, even scenarios I've never even run into before. Need to cover those ones. If there's an alien invasion on Tuesday,
that's right.
How are we going to handle these things? Really, almost anything can be boiled down to one sheet of paper. And ideally, it's more questions than it is answers. So we think like, oh, I need to get all the answers. Really, I want to have the questions. So let's use paperwork as an example. No advisor should be doing their own paperwork. So what are questions that the team should be asking when they're doing paperwork?
But Jarvis, paperwork can be like complex, and if it gets wrong, it's going to delay everything. Isn't that the highest and best use of an advisor's time, is to make sure it's correct?
Well, the first half is true. It does need to be correct. And if it's messed up, it is a big problem. And so this is where we want to ask questions. Like a question I would want my team to ask is this the most current paperwork? Cool. Well, how do I answer that? I'm going to call whoever the paperwork provider is, the custodian, whomever, make sure this is the most correct information. All right, where do the paper? I ask, where do we most often have issues with paperwork? Transposed numbers. Cool. So let's go back through and check for any transposed numbers. So this is where we want to go through. And then to your point, Micah, about, hey, this needs to be right. Cool. How do we make sure that this is right? Have the advisor look at it before he or she walks into the meeting. And so those are kind of steps that we can have in place on one page. Whereas if I try to say like, let's do a guide for every line of every form that next week will change, never works.
You know, we used to have that back in the 90s. I remember growing up, my parents had this. They had overlays that they would put on top of paperwork, right? Because insurance applications didn't change every 30 seconds like they do now, right? And so they were the same ones, and they'd have overlays that were highlighted, and they put an overlay on top of each page of the insurance, and it would tell them exactly what to fill out and what to go through. But again, they were creating a process so that the advisor didn't have to go back and review all of the paperwork, right? So I don't think we need to go to that detail, especially with the great ways that we can fill out paperwork online with software now that happens. Jarvis, I just want to put this in a little bit of compartmentalize this a little bit, right? You have a beginning practice, you have a solo practice kind of thing with a couple of employees, and you have like an enterprise practice, right? So like on an enterprise practice, like I can't even tell you the last time that I've even looked at paperwork, because we have 4 people in our operations department. We have a senior lead, Charnel, which does just fantastic on all of this stuff. And she takes care of just everything in there in team. But I can also rewind the clock to say, okay, and I was talking to another advisor a couple weeks ago that he's making about 50, 60 grand a year. He just started, you know, and he's like, hey, I'm listening to the podcast and I need to delegate all of these things. And I was like, whoa, pump the brakes here, buddy. You don't have money to delegate these things. And if you're going to spend money, it needs to be on prospecting and marketing. That's where your money needs to go. And you just need to do the paperwork. He's like, no. You guys said I shouldn't be doing these things. And I think that's a great pushback that's right here, right? We got to think about where we are in our practice that's there. Now, if we're just starting less than $100,000 in revenue, right, and we don't have a solid growth plan that's going to be there, I'm not all about you hiring a bunch of people to do everything. Guess what? You just got to roll up and do the grunt work right now. You got to get the bankroll coming in that you can afford to delegate things. Jarvis, any pushback on that before we kind of go to that middle tier practice, solopreneur?
No, I agree. I mean, ideally, we'd want to get to a part-time virtual assistant as quick as we possibly could. But you're right. You've got some of those things you've got to earn. And so if you're not at the point, if you have that example of somebody making 50, 60 grand a year, and congratulations, I remember working a lot of years before I got to 50, 60 grand a year.
Yeah.
That's where you need to delegate to yourself. It's really, which is time blocking. You need to say, all right, during the afternoons is when I do all my administration tasks. Why the afternoons? Because nobody doesn't get around to administrative tasks. For whatever reason, those ones always come to the first. So we want to eat our frog. We want to do our prospecting very first. We want to do our client service next and our admin after that. And so, yeah, if you're in the 50 to 60, you've got to do the hard work, but you've got to time block it. Like a maniac, you've got to time block it.
Yeah, super, super disciplined with that. All right, then the next stage of that, right, is going to be, I'm going to call it kind of the solopreneur, where you have, just yourself, a solo advisor, and then you can start getting a couple of support staff. And that's going to start kind of $80,000+, maybe $100,000. Now we're starting to get a part-time person. Now we're starting to get a virtual person that's going to be there. And as your income goes up, you're kind of scaling and bringing on more of those full-time employees. And then Jarvis, one of the other hard questions that comes into is, okay, when do we hire? So when do we delegate certain tasks? And is there any metric, is there any dollar value that you use that says, and I know the answer is yes, but is there any dollar value that you use that say, hey, what tasks should I be doing versus what tasks do I need to delegate?
Yeah, you and I joked before this episode started that I remember when Nick Murray years and years ago said, hey, any task less than $50 an hour should be delegated. And I remember thinking at the time, this was before all this inflation, thinking, there's nothing I do that costs $50 an hour. and now I know that you and I, at that level, we're talking practices that are doing multi-million dollars of production. We're saying, hey, anything less than $1,000 an hour, I can't be touching. But you just need to do a threshold there. Hey, if I can delegate this, I can get a good virtual assistant for $50 an hour. I can have he or she do these tasks. I've got to get away from these tasks. And we tell ourselves, oh, I'll delegate that when, and you'll never get to the when without the delegation.
Yeah, really important right there. So here's the way I would break this down mathematically. Is I would jump in and say, okay, great. What is your ideal client worth today? not your dream client, right? I don't want to be hearing from a new advisor that says, oh, they work with $12 million clients. No, you don't. You don't have one, right? So that's your dream client. Who is your ideal client that you have today? Realistically, look at that. Then we base that based on hours and we say, okay, great. If you have a client you're going to make maybe $10,000 a year on, which is fantastic. How many of those clients do you want? How much time would you be working? Then we come up with that hourly rate aspect that you're going to have. Then that sets the level for delegation. And that should be the first tier. Is this $500 an hour work? Is this $1,000 an hour work? $2,000 an hour work? Where's your threshold? Anything less than that dollar amount, you need to be thinking about delegating and saying, all right, this is not $2,000 an hour work, 500, whatever that dollar amount is for you. Now this is something that I need to delegate because you need to be focused on the highest value of your time if you really want to grow your practice.
Yeah, and that calculation, by the way, it fits on a Post-it note. We talk about this in my book, The Post-it Note Business Plan, on that chapter on it. This is not an elaborate Monte Carlo simulation with 6 pages of Excel. So it's a Post-it note thing. Mike,
we could run this like 10,000 different ways and see what happens and then come back to the same answer.
Tell me you haven't done that before.
Not on my hourly rate. Not on my hourly rate. I have not.
Okay, fair enough. I've done it on a few things. Scheduling is another thing to delegate, right? It definitely should be automated. You should be using Calendly or Acuity or something like that. That definitely needs to be automated, if only, and here's another reason why we delegate things, to make sure the system works reliably. I am not reliable for scheduling. If you called me on my cell phone, if you could somehow get that number and said, hey, Matt, could we meet Thursday at 3:17? I'd be like, yeah, sure, Thursday, 3:17, no problem. It'd blow up my whole day. Colleen, my office manager, is super reliable. Hey, Matthew sees clients on these days and these times. Which one works best for you? Can I see him on Friday? Nope, Matthew sees clients on these days and these times. And so that's another place where we want to delegate, is anywhere we're not reliable for results.
Yeah, and bringing somebody else in that is just fantastic, because someone else has the rules they have to follow, right? Colleen doesn't have permission to violate and make an appointment on Saturday morning at 2 a.m. Jarvis does. And so that way we feel extra guilt with that calendaring. So we're going to remove it from there. So you should delegate all calendaring items, all email items, all correspondence items, right? Any administration tasks should be delegated. Some compliance things you still have to do. That's fine. You can review and do those. The main focus of your time, though, needs to be on development, which is sales, prospecting, training, etc., client meetings, delivering value add, strategic planning, right? That needs to be the main focus of your time. Everything else you need to figure out on how to delegate. And the biggest thing with delegating, again, once you delegate it, you never pick it back up. You always embrace your team member. If they have any questions, what's the process, right? Something goes wrong, you get back with that team member. You ask them to pull the process up and review the process. Did they not follow the process, or did you not have a process? Which one was it if it went wrong? Or is your process just wrong? And now's the time to update that process. But you need to expect things are going to go wrong, because you need to set the right expectations mentally to stick with delegating. Because Jarvis, I did it a lot of times like a yo-yo. I delegate things and I take it back, and I delegate things and I would take it back, right? Because they weren't done right. Well, why aren't they done right? Because I wouldn't articulate what the friggin' process was. I wouldn't talk about what the steps needed to be, and clearly the team wasn't coming to the right outcome.
Yeah, you also took away in that example any consequences for not just figuring it out, right? This is where delegation often goes wrong. If I'm the easy button, and I generally am, right? I have the most knowledge in the office. I have the most resources, everything like that. I'm the easy button. Let me just ask Matt. And every time I say, yeah, sure, let me just solve that. And by the way, I'm a problem solver, Micah, so are you. So is almost everyone listening to this. We love solving problems. That's what we do. To the chagrin of our spouses, that's another discussion. But that's it. And so if the team can come to me and say, hey, instead of figuring out the answer to this, if I can just ask Matt, then that's going to stop them from figuring out. So part of this delegation is to have a hard line to say, if somebody comes to me as a question, instead of being a problem solver, I'm going to be a leader and say, hey, tell me what options you have. Tell me what you researched. Tell me what you would do in this situation, which is very difficult to do, but that's where progress comes.
I love it. So Jarvis's podcast is all about action items, taking things and moving them to the next step, right? Which is really, really important. So I'm going to say, regardless on how far you are in the delegation process, you need to pick 3 to 7 things this week and choose to delegate them, right? Eliminate them, automate them, get them off your plate, right? So any which way you wanted to go, eliminate, automate, delegate, go for it. But get 3 to 7 things off your plate this week. This could be, well, it's not listening to podcasts, by the way. You can't delegate that one. So you're still stuck with us. But this could be emails, this could be filing, this could be some compliance review task, right? What are things that you were doing? This could be things in your personal life. Who does your grocery shopping? What about your laundry, right? What about your household maintenance, right? You could delegate things on that side as well, but pick 3 to 7 things to delegate this week. What are they? And then who's going to do them?
Like I would say a second action item compared to that one is what is going to fill the place for that. So we talked earlier about, hey, if you're only doing $60,000 of production, you cannot afford a household manager. But whatever you delegate, you need to say, hey, I'm going to free that time for something more productive, typically prospecting. So again, every time I delegate something, that hole needs to be filled in with prospecting. That is really a high value use.
Jarvis, as always, it's a blast. Make sure you take action items. Make sure you go out, give the podcast 5 stars, share this. We have some massive goals to change how financial planning is done in the industry, but it starts with you. It starts with you implementing and listening and making these changes and sharing this podcast with other people. So give us 5 stars. And until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.